please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
30 minutes, but first let's get straight to the market action of the day. There were no Monday blues clearly on the Lal Street as bulls sustained their momentum, aided by earnings recovery, at least in some pockets. So the Nifty touched the 10,750 mark in intraday trade and rallied about 0.5% by the end of the day. The Sensex also ended firmly above the 35,000 mark. Bank Nifty meanwhile closed with gains of about 0.5%, while mid-caps outperformed, gaining 0.4%. As far as the Indian equity markets are concerned. But let's talk about the top story this evening. Yesterday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi claimed that every single village in India has access to electricity. Now, this after a remote village called Lising in Manipur became the last to get access to power. Now, remember, in April 2015, the government had identified over 19,600 villages which did not have access to power. And 3 years later, the government has said that the mission has been accomplished. Now, the government considers a village as electrified if about 10% of the village has access to power supply. So, this does not mean every household in the country has electricity. In fact, according to the Power Ministry data, over 3 crore households still do not have access to power. We spoke to Power Secretary Ajay Kumar Bhalla earlier in the day. We asked him to give us a timeline as to by when all households in India would have access to electricity. This was his response.
So one shouldn't be looking at it that this is a very difficult number. Even in these villages, I come back to the villages with a little bit of issue that there were a lot of difficulties in connecting some of the villages. Sure. These were, as I said, were the last mile. The achievement is not the numbers. Achievement is the difficulty under which these villages were connected. We are looking at Saubhagya scheme to be completed. Not only up to March 19, but we are trying to target it within December 18, so that in any case, and I mean that is a stage if even one house is left unconnected, we'll have some time to connect to the remaining houses.
3.3 crore villages by December 2019.
That's a big target on my hand.
Did I get you right? This is 3.3 crore unelectrified villages. 18. You have December 18. 2019 as the date for that?
3.13.
Yes.
Yeah. Why should you be so this thing? As I said, these are 30 states, large number of distribution companies, each company having many divisions and circles. Why should it be a problem for anyone?
No, I'm not saying. I was just checking with you, confirming with you if that is the goal. It's extremely laudable, and of course, every citizen.
We are doing the internal.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, we are doing an internal target of completing it by December 2018.
2018?
Yeah.
Well, the important caveat to keep in mind that a village is considered connected once at least 10% of the households have connection with an electricity supply. So that's one caveat to keep in mind. Let's shift focus now to the day's earning action. India's largest mortgage lender, HDFC, reported a strong set of earnings for the fourth quarter of the last fiscal. While its net interest income came in line with estimates, its net profit beat the street. Ritu Singh joins us. Ritu, take us through the fine print of HDFC's fourth quarter earnings.
Straight to the key highlights of HDFC Limited that reported its fourth quarter numbers today. Profits growth was 39%, much higher than what the street was expecting. This was on the back of lower tax costs and the stake sale in 2 of its subsidiaries, resulting in a profit on sale of investments of 294 crore rupees, which aided the bottom line growth. Net interest income grew by 4%. Provisions jumped about 89% sequentially and 21% over the last year. But this increase in provisions is largely on the back of a policy of the lender to set aside some profits for additional provisioning. Loan book growth was fairly healthy at 21%. Individual book grew by 29% and non-individual by 21%. Gross NPAs came down sequentially to 1.11% versus 1.15%. Spreads were also maintained at 2.29% and margins shrunk very little and stood at close to about 4%. So overall, good set of numbers for HDFC Limited yet again.
Okay, Ritu, thanks for joining in with that. So it was a good set of numbers for HDFC. But continuing with earnings, private sector lender Kotak Mahindra Bank also reported an in-line set of earnings for the fourth quarter. So if you look at the standalone net profit, that jumped about 15%, coming in line with what we were expecting earlier. While net interest income came in higher by 19% on an annual basis, Kotak Mahindra Bank's asset quality saw marginal improvement. Loan growth, meanwhile, remained consistent at 25%. Speaking to the media later, Uday Kotak said that he is open at looking at inorganic growth as long as it is sensible. He, however, refused to comment directly on rumours surrounding Axis Bank. Here's what he had to say at the earnings press conference.
We are open to be looking at across financial services, but in a manner which is sensible and value accretive for our shareholders. And as we have taken a position on this, we don't want to get into any potential rumors or speculation. Our position is that if and when we have something, and we are looking at not only banking but across the financial sector, we would certainly share with you.
Well, let's stay with the banking space. The Reserve Bank of India has eased norms for foreign investors to invest in government bonds. The central bank has withdrawn the investment cap that barred FPIs from investing in Indian bonds with less than a 3-year maturity. In fact, the Reserve Bank has also given a nod for housing finance companies to access external commercial borrowings. Now, bank stocks as well as housing finance companies rallied in trade post this move by the central bank. Lata Venkatesh is here with the details. Lata, over to you.
Yes, there were two sets of rules that the Reserve Bank issued late last week. One is that it eased the rules governing investment by foreign funds in Indian government securities, which include central government and state government. The first is that until now, foreign funds were allowed to invest only in government paper which had more than 3 years left to be redeemed, what you call residual maturity of 3 years. Now they are saying that foreign funds can invest in anything. I mean, even if there is only 1 month left to mature, they can, which means basically T-bills. But the point is there is no restriction, time limit restriction. And the other restriction that has gone off is in corporate bonds. They had to be a minimum residual maturity of 3 years. Now they have reduced that to 1 year. Separately, there are also stock-wise restrictions. A foreign investor collectively could invest only 20% in one particular security. Now that limit has been raised to 30%, and individual FPIs could invest, can invest only up to 10% in one paper. These are about the restrictions. Mainly they have been eased, and that 3-year residual maturity going off is one of the biggest steps, which is seen as attracting a lot of foreign investors. Now, I just want to caution that there was a reason why that 3-year limit was used. It was to prevent hot money in government securities. At the time of the taper tantrum, a rule like this made it very easy for foreign funds to get out. This actually came at that time, so people would be a little worried. There is also a set of people who are a little worried that maybe the rules have been eased too much. But the important point is, as of now, this is expected to increase FII investment or at least improve the sentiment. Therefore, on Wednesday, you should expect government bond yields to fall by at least 5 basis points or so. And more importantly, corporate bonds could fall even by 25 basis points in some buckets. So that will largely be seen as positive, and you could see the positive impact on banking stocks, even stocks like Yes Bank, which hold corporate paper. The second set of rules was on ECBs, that is external commercial borrowing, which is foreign loans. That window has now opened for housing finance companies, port trusts, and some other infrastructure companies. That again is positive for housing finance companies. They have to hedge it completely. So the cost may not be a big advantage, but it opens up another source of funds for housing finance companies, and therefore you saw these companies' stocks also rising in trade on Monday.
Oh, absolutely. Housing finance companies were in focus today at the back of that story. Thanks, Lata, for putting that into perspective. We will have to take a short commercial break, though. Up next, India remains on United States Trade Representatives' watch list along with China, Russia, Canada and 32 other nations as US claims lack of sufficiently measurable improvements to India's intellectual property framework. We'll take that discussion forward on the other side. Don't go anywhere.
Well, a very good evening. You're watching What's Hot. And of course, on to the big story of the day. India continues to figure on America's priority watch list as one of 36 countries that do not give adequate protection to the USA's intellectual property rights. Now, the Office of the United States Trade Representative released its special 301 report on the state of intellectual property protection over the weekend. The report alleges that there has been no sufficient improvement in India's intellectual property framework over the past 1 year. That's not all. The report also criticizes India's implementation of its Patent Act as being restrictive. Rituparna Bhuyana joins us. Ritu, what else does the report highlight, and are there any concerns as far as India is concerned?
Yet again, India has been put in the priority watch list by the USTR in a report that was released last weekend. And while doing so, the USTR report says that as far as India is concerned and the IPR regime in India is concerned, there is lack of sufficient measurable improvement. Moreover, the report says that the IPR regime negatively affected US IPR holders over the past 1 year, and also it's difficult for innovators in India to receive and maintain patents. There are specific issues which the USTR report raises. For example, it says that 20% of the medicine sold in India is counterfeit, and India and China are major sources for counterfeit medicines in the global market. On Section 3D of the Patents Act, an issue which has been raised by this report every year, the USTR report says that the Section 3D acts as an obstacle for innovators seeking timely entry into the Indian market. On IP-intensive products, the USTR report says that on several sectors, like products from the solar and energy sector, products from the capital goods sector, as well as ICT, India imposes high customs duty. In addition to that, the USTR report says that there is lack of protection for regulatory tests, and there is inadequate protection for trade secrets in India. Now, what does it mean as far as the Indian government is concerned? Well, India does not recognize the Section 301 report, which the USTR files every year, and has maintained that it's a unilateral report. But we'll have to wait and see what action the US government takes based on the observations which have been made by the USTR's office. With that, it's back to you.
Oh, absolutely. As per the procedure, they have to take action if at all the USTR does put any country on the watch list. But thanks, Ritu, for taking us through that. Let's take the discussion forward now. Joining in now to put this into perspective is DG Shah. He is the Secretary General of the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance. Thank you so much, Mr. Shah, for joining in on this show. Let me begin by asking you, we have put protocols into place, be it the National Health Policy, be it the IPR policy in 2016. Even if you look at the kind of patents that have been examined by the government, I believe it's gone from 17,000 patent applications in 2016 to almost 60,000 applications. What do you make of this, sir, to begin with? And under the TRIPS agreement, do you think there is a case at this point in time for India to actually look at moving the WTO for a dispute settlement in this particular case?
Well, there are two options before the government of India. One, either to ignore this 301 and proceedings under that. Second is to take it to the WTO dispute settlement body. So far, India has decided to ignore it, and that seems to be more prudent than focusing on this issue. Let me just put this in perspective that China has been under priority watch list for 14 years. India has been there for about 7-8 years. This year, Canada and Colombia have been added to the priority watch list. So there are 12 countries in the priority watch list, which includes Russia, Ukraine. So this is one observation that India is not singled out. Number two, as far as India is concerned, the language is much milder than it used to be in the past. Because in our submission to the USTR, we had narrated significant steps that India has taken over the last 12 months. And step by step, we had destroyed every argument put forth by PHRMA and BIO, the two associations which have been representing the big pharma. Because we argued that compulsory license, for instance, in 100 years, India has issued just one compulsory license. Word over, in last 10 years, more than 100 compulsory licenses have been issued, including in the US and the Europe. Now, there is no evidence to support this, but it is essentially driven, and the USTR is to some extent misled by these associations,
Right.
so that they can have a TRIPS plus IPR regime in India.
Right. Right, Mr. Shah. But here's one interesting question, that as far as this 301 is concerned, let's keep in mind that the annexure 1 with it clearly says that countries that are part of this watch list are the most egregious violators. That's the terminology being used. It also says that minus action being taken by these countries, there could be action in the form of even sanctions by the US president. The concern being expressed here essentially is that we have a hawkish regime in place as far as the US is concerned. Robert Lighthizer is known to be quite hawkish in that regard. We've already seen action with regard to China in terms of import tariffs. The question here, Mr. Shah, is can we in India afford to take it lightly? Can we anticipate perhaps unilateral preemptive action from the United States in form of import tariffs perhaps?
Well, we need to understand that USTR cannot take action alone. Just like we have interministerial committees, there is a committee which consists of Department of Treasury, HHS, Department of Commerce, USTR, President's Office of Budget Management. Their representatives are all there, and they sum up. Even if USTR is hawkish, there are moderates in this committee and who take a larger view, and India's contribution.
But sir, I agree with your point. I completely agree with your point, sir, that yeah, so I agree with you. I agree that the wording has changed and it has become much lighter if you compare to the last 2-3 reports that have come out. But the fact of the matter is that the US administration has become more stringent. Are you prepared for action? And if yes, what action are you prepared for? What are the steps that can be taken by the US government, considering the fact that USTR has to prepare an action plan and submit it to a Senate committee?
Well, the worst that can happen is a tariff that US can impose on pharmaceuticals or any other product being imported by the US. Now, that action would definitely lead to an action through the WTO dispute settlement body, because at that point India can go back to WTO and say that this is unfair, and there is India's patent regime, IPR regime is fully compliant with the TRIPS agreement, and therefore these actions will not stand the scrutiny of WTO. But as I mentioned, even in US's own interest, they would not like the prices of medicines to go up. One of the major initiative of the present regime is to reduce the prices of medicines in the United States. And any such action which raises the prices of medicine will be contrary to the Trump administration's promise to the people. Therefore, we are not unduly concerned. We are concerned. We have been sensitizing government.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Fair enough. One final question, sir. We're running out of time. I'll make this brief. Amongst the various concerns that have been highlighted, here's this one that really stands out. The USTR report clearly says that 20% of drugs sold in the Indian markets are counterfeit. 55% of the drugs that are seized, the counterfeit drugs that are seized, are from India. So some very serious questions being raised. My question to you is, leave alone the concerns of US being hawkish, can we in India, as far as the IPR regime here is concerned, can we be perhaps, can we be complacent about this? Because these are very startling numbers. 20% of the drugs here in India being counterfeit.
Well, the definition of counterfeit varies from country to country, and US has a totally different definition of counterfeit than what is generally accepted by the WHO. there is no evidence or data that USTR can produce to show that 20% of drugs sold in India are counterfeit or supplied to the world is counterfeit. Even WHO data does not support that. So this is a claim made by some associations based on reports in print media, which will not stand the scrutiny of validity of data. Number two, we must be concerned about the quality of medicines that is in India. So independent of what USTR is saying, we have issues, and we have issues of spurious and product not of standard quality.
Okay, so you raised an important point there. Very quickly, we are very tight on time, sir. If you can give us what specifically has to be done. 4 points that have to be done at this point in time. Let's not go into whether those claims are substantiated or not. What specifically at this point in time is missing in the regime that can be fixed? If you had to point out the top 3 or top 4 points.
So number one, strengthen the India's drug regulatory system. Number two, amend the Drugs and Cosmetics Act to empower the center and withdraw. See, there are concurrent powers between state and center, but we need to strengthen the central power. Number three, stringent inspection of manufacturing companies and follow-up action thereon, and an action by industry consciously for themselves that they need to protect their own reputation. So these are 4 actions which I would suggest we need to focus on immediately.
Fair enough, Mr. Shah. Appreciate the time that you've taken us to join us with your perspective as far as the USTR 301 report is concerned. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of What's Hot. Thank you so much for watching. Up next, we shift our focus to the Lal Street. There were no Monday blues as bulls sustained their momentum, aided by earnings recovery in some pockets. Markets today, Talk Back takes the action forward.